Burn the Box, a portal to the world of hidden truths and untapped power. A sanctuary where together we unmask the oppression hidden in the shadows far too long. Unscripted, unplanned, unrehearsed. Stay tuned for powerful conversations, thought-provoking insights as we ignite the sacred rebellion of the global majority. Let's begin this incredible journey together. Welcome to Burn the Box. Your host, Dr. Sonali Deepika.
Welcome to this edition of Burn the Box. And today I'm here with my friend, colleague, and someone who has become like a brother to me on this path over the last about 3 years, Tony Chavira.
Hey, Sonali.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. And for people listening, this is going to be the first of Sonali's many episodes as an introduction to this podcast. And so, but talk to me a second, Sonali. We're doing this retroactively, right?
Yes, we are.
You've done all of them so far.
Yes. Yes, I've recorded 10 episodes. So you and I will be bookending this series, this first episode, and then we recorded the episode 10 together.
Mhm.
And I'm so grateful because otherwise I wasn't sure how I was going to start it. I wanted to give a little intro because of the nature of this podcast, and I'm very grateful that you offered to be in it with me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I mean, I know a bit of this development because I've seen you do it over long periods of time. So I'm going to ask you about kind of different eras that led to you being the kind of healer, coach, abolitionist, anti-racist trainer that you are. But I mean, this is the first, I guess everyone else's first episode of Burn the Box. What does, maybe it's worth me asking, what does Burn the Box mean to you? And maybe also if you could give me some, and everyone, some details about your journey leading to Burn the Box, like to developing it.
Thank you. Oh, gosh, now I have to think of where to start. You know, I will say that, like, as I hear you mention abolitionist and anti-racist, this stepping into this kind of work of anti-racism, of somatic abolitionism, is definitely more recent for me. And I would almost say in the last, 5 years or so. Prior to that, I spent, almost 20 years with medical education, training, and then practice, all in Chicago. Did medical school in Chicago, decided to specialize in psychiatry and then in the field of child and adolescent psychiatry, which was influenced by a traumatic loss I had 2 years into medical school when my younger brother took his life. I did not go into medical school thinking I was going to do psychiatry. I really thought I was going to be a pediatrician, as my father had been. Not that he was pushing me to do any of that, but I felt called, like I wanted to work with youth. There was definitely that calling. And so after this loss, and as the years went, I decided, well, I'm going to work with youth, but I'm going to work with youth in a different way. And I'm going to focus on emotional and behavioral development, suffering. I had, I think, a very somewhat idealistic like thought about, I'm going to do this so I can help. Because having gone through that loss and still, I mean, it's whatever, 23 years later, it still affects me, of course. But having gone through that, I'm like, oh, what can we do to prevent this type of tragedy in youth and in families? It was good. It was good for a while, and it felt very fulfilling for a while until I realized how burnt out I was really with that kind of work. And that has a lot to do with just some of my ways of moving through life, of not being able to set the best boundaries and like emotionally. And so taking on a lot, like every person I saw, every family. And this definitely contributed to burnout. And in addition to somewhere maybe like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I started getting introduced to like holistic healing, and that started with Ayurveda, this 5,000-year-old indigenous healing tradition from India and Sri Lanka, and then a lot of other things. So I was like kind of on this path of, I was feeling the limitations of the Western approach, the Western approach to like the acute stages of things, and not really dealing with like prevention and thriving and all that.
Yeah, if you don't mind me asking, just to like expand on it, you said you're feeling the impacts of systemic, really Western and white in that way, right? Model of medicine. When you say feeling, could you expand on what you mean by like you're feeling the impacts? Feeling them in what way?
Thank you. It's a good question. I was feeling how what I was doing and what I had been trained to do. When I was doing the work that I'd been trained to do. But what that work was really very much like band-aids on a much bigger problems, that were there. And I didn't have, as you're asking me about, I didn't have the awareness that I do now of this like systemic whiteness and the many layers that we're holding in our bodies of this kind of oppression. I didn't even, I couldn't have articulated that aspect back then, but I did realize what I was doing wasn't really helping people in the way that I would have liked to, and I was experiencing that myself too, in certain ways, with having my own history of depression, anxiety, and all these things, being in that same system and not faulting anyone. It's just I knew that this wasn't getting at like what Ayurveda talked about talks about with health. Like, what is health? What is that about? And according to Ayurveda, and I think many indigenous healing traditions, it's like vitality. It's like, how much energy do you have? How much zest for life do you have? It's like that. And then what I was trained to do and what I was doing was like, oh, health is the absence of a whole list of symptoms. Do you have these symptoms? Oh, if not, you're healthy. Like, you check that box, and it's like, this is I just found it lacking.
Yeah. What was it like for you to first have the sort of awakening awareness of being really like systemically oppressed on one side, but also coming into the toys that are like cultural, leaning into your culture, like feeling its like power is a light word. I want to say like feeling the sort of revolutionary quality of it emerging more richly in your healing process.
Yeah, I learned about Ayurveda from a white woman who was a yoga teacher and Ayurvedic practitioner in
Mm,
Chicago. And I remember sitting there listening and learning and realizing, oh my gosh, this is so different than what I had been trained in.
mm,
The way of healing
mm,
in Western medicine, that I'd been trained in. And um it was something that I needed for myself. Like I needed it
mhm,
in my own life to
mm,
recognize where I was lacking that like vitality and
mm,
that kind of joy for life, that that energy,
mhm.
and I don't even know if this is answering your question, but this is what's coming to me, that then I started on a path that was actually, as is the case for a lot of what I do, it was for me first. It was like, okay, I need to learn, I need to understand this better. And I did different programs, in the US.
Mhm,
Um, but it was definitely was tapping into a whole different way of viewing health, of viewing healing, of
mm,
viewing vitality, of
mm,
viewing what does it mean to like get up in the morning and have that energy to do the things that are important to us, that matter to us, that that we feel like passionate about.
mhm. Yeah. And really, I know knowing you, like really leaning into your felt experience, right? Leaning into how it feels day to day, and without giving too much of your story away, because I want to hear about it, right? I have everyone here. Like it felt so like such a dramatic rift, right? After a period of time, the
Mhm.
person that you were turning into versus the one you wanted to let go of that you moved right out of the country.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
would you tell me a little more? Again, like my questions are more elicitations. You're not
I know.
answering obviously them right or wrong. It's like literally everything you say is going to be right. So, if you feel like,
Yeah.
or maybe what comes up for you as I ask about your move from the
Yes.
United States to Mexico.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony. I appreciate this because it's much better than me trying to just talk about this as I had thought I was going to do. Um, yeah, I was at a point, like these crossroads in life that we can reach, and something was going to have to shift. I was going to have to leave my job. Was I going to go into integrative psychiatry? Was going to do something perhaps that brought in a lot of different aspects of healing and also with psychiatry. And it was right about then that I got an invitation from my mother's friend,
Mm,
whose family owns these Ayurvedic resorts in Sri Lanka. And
mm,
she said, come and explore your roots, come and take the time you didn't take in your, all these years of education and all that. And it
mm,
was like an immediate yes. Although if I'm honest about it, I got the email and I started reading it, and I was on my phone, just what I normally am on, and I just put it down. I'm like, I
mm,
just knew that my whole life was going to change. So I couldn't
mm,
even read it the first time because
mm.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is a yes. This invitation is a yes. And
Yeah.
I yeah, so that's what so it took some time that I left my job and then left, most of the stuff I had in the US. I had lived in a condo for 13, 14 years, I think. Like just it was just I'm leaving. I'm leaving,
Mhm.
I'm going. I'm not sure what's gonna happen.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that was important
Mhm.
in my
What
path.
what was it like for you? If you'd be a little, I'd love to hear a little more of sort of all the senses and meaning, just a lot of what's coming up around, if you can remember it, just that moment, right there, you got that email. It's like, okay, my life is about to change. And,
Yeah.
again, for people listening, it was a complete shift. It was really a total life renovation, revolution. Um, Yeah, what was the
Yeah.
experience like for you? What was happening? in that moment?
I feel like in that moment there was some kind of charge in my body of like, this is huge. This is your life is completely going to change. And it was that that combination of excitement and also nervousness and fear that comes when we're like making a big step, but we don't really know what's coming. And when I look back, I realize that all of that happened once I got connected to this indigenous healing tradition of my own lineage, one that had been very much suppressed, repressed, nearly abolished, with 3 different phases of colonization in that country, notably the British who brought like this Western medicine. I don't know what you all are doing here. But luckily the tradition had continued, although that's a whole other story, because I do think it was very much affected by the colonization, like how it's practiced. This is what I found when I went, and it was a resort. It was a gorgeous resort, and have to add here that the resort that I ended up staying at when I was, oh my gosh, now I have to think about it, but like 42 when I went, that resort is where my parents spent one night of their honeymoon. When it wasn't an Ayurvedic resort, it was just a hotel. It was an old hotel. I mean, it's an older hotel. So there was something on so many levels of like going back to roots and going back to like, oh, this is where my parents were before I was a thought, and like all of that. But also finding out that, oh yeah, this it's beautiful. People come, they love it. You're getting fed amazing food. You're getting these really incredible body treatments. But for where I was coming from, it wasn't offering me like this holistic approach. So I definitely had that, like it was a full charge of, oh my gosh, something is really going to change now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like images I have in my head are quite historical the way you're describing it. So your parents having been here previously and then you returning, but also like the rift between the way that we're taught to put Western medicine on a plateau or I don't know, like a hierarchy, like a higher level. And the sort of violence of doing that to people who, like your own indigenous tradition, that's like tremendously healing, and then feeling, I guess, the rift of those two, like grinding probably for so long against one another, and then but you then in the midst of that grind, like feeling like following that the pull, like that sort of, it's somatic with spiritual realignment with sort of re-indigenization is what I'm hearing in that process. And so you do this retreat. You're already a psychiatrist. You're like really expanding what it means to heal, but also shifting away from what wasn't healing. And maybe I'll ask here, because I'm hearing like the word that keeps coming up for me inside is grounding, regrounding. And maybe I'll ask about your company conception. The Sacred Ground is an LLC Sonali began. If you want to talk about how that came into reality for you.
Oh, yes. So to talk about that, I have to give a little bit of like from that point of being in Sri Lanka, and then realizing that something you brought in, you mentioned spiritual, and I do think Ayurveda is deeply spiritual. I think it's profoundly holistic and vast. And my experience there, and having an awareness at that time, like of the colonization of the 3 times colonized little island that I was on, I I just experienced, for me, that there just wasn't as much of the spiritual brought into this little experience that I had. And so I was still searching. So I left the resort eventually. Eventually, I got connected to a teacher who was based in LA, who had a program called Sex, Love, and Relationship coaching. She had some programs. I did like an online program, and it's when I eventually decided to pursue that and to explore this aspect that had been very repressed and suppressed in me, namely sensuality and sexuality, that I realized in doing the program, so like 3/4 of the way through the program, to start this business. So the business, I Am Sacred Ground, the name of that was something I got from a friend who I had met on a retreat I had done. And that retreat was, that retreat had a spiritual component to it. And we had to come up with like a mantra. And so I still remember my mantra was, I am love lit up. Like it was this is what her mantra was, I am sacred ground. I loved it then. That was in 2016. And so then these 2 years go by, and now I'm starting this business. I couldn't get that out of my head. And so I reached out to her and asked if I could use this for my business. And she was so generous in saying, I think that came through for you, like that. It really touched me. And so that's where I Am Sacred Ground came. And it was about connecting to our bodies and to the sacredness of our bodies, and to really know our worthiness, our deservingness, to love ourselves, to know that we are whole. That's where that came from.
Yeah, loving our bodies. Tell me more about that if you're open to it. I know that there's so much more significance when you say that, loving our body. If you're open to it.
Yeah, no. I think that I'll say that early on with the business, when I was leaning into it and exploring for myself, the mantras that came are, I'm whole, I am loved, I am worthy, I am deserving, I am sacred ground. And when I say that, these are very much mantras that I have needed and continue to. The process of loving my own body has been a lifelong journey for sure. I can say that I held a lot of self-hatred and just hatred in general for my own body. I remember years ago, by this time I think I was maybe practicing already psychiatry, but I was going for therapy for myself. And my therapist recommended a mindful eating group that was in Chicago. And it was like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that, with a couple that were both therapists that were leading it. And I still remember them doing this mindful, it was like a mindful exercise for the body. And they were just like, guiding it and going through the body and kind of bringing awareness to our relationship to our whole body. And I still remember, like, it was like my arms, as my hands were on my arm, like we were kind of moving through our bodies, like my hands were on my arms, and the guidance was, bringing love to like, all the parts of our body and to our arms. And I right away inside was like, I don't love my arms. how is this person telling me I'm supposed to love my arms? Like, I hate my arms. It had been like, it had been, now it sounds even crazy, but it had been something so ingrained of like, you know, so conditioned to this hatred to different parts of my body. And that's just physical. But as I learned for myself going through this training program in order to be a coach, the foundation is really the self-love. Like how and how do we bring that to our bodies? How do we recognize whatever the messages are that we're holding, that many times they're not ours? There's things that have been told to us, you know, like there's so much conditioning involved, and that goes on so many different levels. But that is a big piece of this work, is to cultivate self-love. And in doing that, we bring love and compassion to all these messages, to parts within us that are not holding that message, you know, I believe.
Yeah, as you're saying that too, I touched my arm. I felt like the sort of receptiveness. My poor arms.
I know.
You know, I've known you a while and seen different types of connection to body things. You mentioned a moment ago, you know, that the charges for disliking your body came from so many places. And if you're open to talking a little about how, because I mean, I'm asking, all right, because I know you, but how that led to to your commitment to somatic abolitionism. Um, I'd love to hear it personally, but I know that's also where where you're gonna guide some of the podcast. So.
Yeah, I think that when we get into this connection to our bodies and bring an awareness to what we're holding in our bodies, that's where for me it opened up so much. Because before that, it was more, I think, just like what was in my family, just because that's, you know, we grew up with. And for me, it was like, okay, I have these messages that I'm holding. But then the deeper I got in this process, the more I realized, oh, I'm holding messages that go far beyond just my immediate family. It's like, what have I been told, having been, you know, born in the UK, raised in the US, like, and never really been, like always like in the minority, thing wherever I was. What am I holding of that? What am I holding that's much larger, that goes much broader than just like my little family experience? And I even had the experience because I did live in Sri Lanka for a year, where I had these ideas of, oh, here I will belong, here I'll be whatever. But I could tell you that, yes, there were some beautiful things about meeting family and just being in the culture and being on that land, for sure. But it's also like, there I was aware of, oh yeah, this 3 times colonized country, and what the people are holding about that. Like, why, and this is all over the world, but why are these pharmacies filled with skin lightening and whitening products? Why are there, like, it was just this, it opened up much bigger, because it's like, why have I been conditioned to feel like I'm not enough? To feel like me and my body is not adequate. And as we have learned from somatic abolition, to feel that I am defective.
Right. And that's the central message, right, of white supremacy.
Right.
Like, right, which is is something we've all in our program or in our cohort, I guess, whom everyone is going to hear from across your podcast,
Yes.
have come to process or learn to process, right, in different ways, including the two of us, our long relationship. For people who are listening, Sonali, I, and a third friend of ours who well, we'd love to bring individually into a more public eye, but
Yes,
and whenever she feels comfortable. But
it's gonna
we've been,
happen.
yeah, it will happen. We've been doing this. We were assigned to one another early on, and to process the impacts of white supremacy in ways that were about exploring the vibe in the space between the three of us, looking over images, reviewing our thoughts, and noticing what the meaning was around these things, and our behaviors in response to that. Exploring the affect and feelings, right? Sensations in the body, and then sort of imagining also possibilities from doing this process. Sonali, how was for you? How did the somatic abolitionist experience, I guess, of our cohort, how did it change you? Really, maybe is a question that again, I'd love to hear. I'm sure everybody else, because I gained so much. I want to sort of preface everything Sonali says. I gained something from. Everyone here needs to know that. I don't know, you're like, oh, but no, it's absolutely true. Even from this experience, and so the more you speak, the more I need to listen. So I'd love to hear it.
Funny. I want to add that, as you mentioned, you and I and our friend Somia, we have met every week for, it feels like it's been 3 years. It's not, I don't think technically, but it's been a long time. And we've met in 2 different countries, the 3 of us. And this really has felt like, yeah, like family. There's that sense of our chosen family. So how did it affect me? Oh my gosh, I know that in some ways it was a little jarring, and like, because we can be in this big group together with our teacher and our co-facilitators, and things are coming up. Like, it was a space where it was holding charge. It was bringing forth charge that people were holding in their bodies. And I know for myself, like I said this to Resma, our teacher, that like it would be so much. I'd just be exhausted afterwards, or sometimes it's like I couldn't even stay present to it, So I say that because like it wasn't something easy. There wasn't I always looked forward to it. I don't think I missed a single session, because my life also has a lot more space than it used to in the US. And so I was always there, but it's like it was intense, sometimes more than others. And then I was so grateful for you and Somia that we could come into our little, just the 3 of us, and process together, hold together, share, but I do feel like there was something happening of an expansion to be able to hold charge of racial trauma, basically. And to look at it, what does it mean? What has it meant, historically, like the things that we've learned through this, right? Historically, intergenerationally, pervasively, persistently, like what are these ways that we have all been in our own, individually, we have our different experiences, but what are the ways we've been shaped by white supremacy? and by this, I always appreciate how Resman would talk about the vertical axis, like white supremacy, and how, like, on this vertical, and then how all of us, as really the global majority, people of color and culture, as you would say, bodies of culture, Black bodies, bodies of culture, how we're kind of like pinned against each other, like we're kept small, repressed, suppressed because of this axis that is held, kind of universally around the globe.
Yeah, by institutions too, right?
By institutions. Yes.
And I'm just conjuring what you said earlier about being in the Western medical field, and you said something also that was interesting, was like understanding suffering, and how, and I wonder about like a link between just suffering itself and having to somehow survive, really, in an institution organized completely around white supremacy. And so I don't, I'm hearing then like your soul has has to rip, you like pull, so far away from the power, the domination, the power and domination of that experience, that training, that way of thinking, that way of living. I've seen you do each one of these kinds of polls in ways. If you're open to just talking about where you are right now, with somatic abolitionism rather, anti-racism coaching, and also since we're talking about not doing these things in a white institutional way, maybe how you structured these podcasts going forward. If you're open to it.
I shared with you how individually, outside of this, how even like the description of the podcast shifted from when I started to where it is now, and that naming of how this is like capturing a sacred rebellion of the global majority as we embrace our collective power. That really feels strong for me. My work shifted, as you know, from first it was like, I'm here for all women. And it's not like I'm not here for all women. I support any of this like expansion and knowing our sacredness, and embodying that for all people. But somatic abolitionism really shifted that for me. It made it so clear that who I'm really here for are women, femmes, non-binary people of color and culture, because I became so much more aware of those extra layers of oppression, those extra layers of suppression and repression that we're holding in our bodies. And it's not to say everyone has the same experience, not at all, but that bringing in that context and helping people of this group who are affected by so many other aspects of oppression, that I hadn't been so aware of, that I certainly wasn't made aware of during medical training and all this. It just became like, I just felt so passionate about, this is who I want to serve,
And now really leaning into that calling again. Yeah. And I can't overstate how aligning for other people Sonali's work is, when you have really powerful waves of intuition you expressed, I think it sort of naturally pulls people, it's pulled me anyway, toward a self-explorative healing, wanting to heal more, wanting to ask more questions, wanting to explore more. And that's been every experience I've ever had with you. I want to name something that might center me just for a quick second, if you're all right with that. But it may to some people who are listening, and it's totally correct in a sense, but may seem as a bit white in the sense that some of my questions look a little directive for Sonali. And a big part of this is going to be about utilizing my white bodiness to hold as much open space for Sonali, one, but two, really get her to show everyone listening, I think, that she is somebody you got to listen to, somebody somebody that when I sit with you, it's not only an expansive experience, it's one where I can feel things moving and shifting inside my physical body, and stirring in a way that even if it feels sometimes like it's quaking or shaking or moving, that same thing you mentioned, that foundation of love is really rich, really present, and I absolutely know it's part of every interview, if not interview, every conversation, right, with everyone coming up. So not to be too directive, but but I'll do it anyway. Is there any sense that you can give everyone listening of what they're going to hear? What's coming up, and maybe some of the things you found interesting without giving away the bag, giving it all away.
Oh, thank you, Tony. And as you said that, I realized, oh yeah, I didn't really answer. You kind of asked it before about what was the podcast about.
No, again, these
then
are
I
all
go on
elicitations, right? No, you're like, I'm hearing things even for the first time that are just like, wow, they remind me, and they remind me of how important it is to hear what you have to say, hear your message.
A big thing that came through our time in the somatic abolitionism course was we did two parts of it. So it was bigger, and then it got quite a bit smaller, like the final cohort that we were in. There was a big theme about emergence. And it came up in the podcast with Resma about like tempering, when we temper our nervous systems, what comes through, what is allowed to come forth, kind of thing. And so that was really what inspired me about reaching out to our group. It was like, here we have, like, anyone I've talked to in our group, I honestly could talk to for hours. Like, it's just not a question. So I knew that there would be interesting conversations, because I just know that. But also that each one of us have done this deep work of tempering our nervous systems through that process that we were all in, and this holding charge and being able to notice all of these levels, our sensations, our emotions, vibration, images, like all of this, what we hold in our bodies. And there's something unique that I felt about having conversations that were not scripted, that we really just come together and start with the question, which I pretty much asked everyone, what's alive for you with burning boxes in your life or in the world or whatever. It's very broad, but it always brought something forth that the person was holding. And like I said, it was not scripted. So I felt equally vulnerable, before it was starting, when we were about to record, with any of the 10 people I connected with, including with you, that it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen? I have that in, like, oh, how is this going to go? But I just had to let that be, and trust that when two individuals, like from our cohort who've done this work, come together, we're each speaking and reflecting from our bodies, and that I felt was really unique.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'll probably just ask you that question, right? So, Sonali, what's alive for you around burning boxes and burning the box?
For me, I'm feeling so passionate, having gone through, well, I guess my life experiences in general, but in addition to that, like this, having experience in the coaching world, having experience in a beautiful program, that's changed names, but it used to be called Sex, Love, and Relationship Coaching, and then working for that program. And what I see out there is a lack of resources out there for bodies of culture, for Black bodies of culture, to do embodiment work, processes that are really, like trainings, whatever they are, that are really holding this unique experience, and that have that awareness of all of this systemic oppression, really, that we're holding, in addition to what all women, I guess, would be facing. And so I'm passionate about, I'm passionate about burning boxes in the healing world, in the coaching world, in just the ways that things have always been done. Or I don't know if that's right, but yeah, I feel like there's something. I feel very passionate, especially with people who are in healing traditions, coaches, doctors, social activism, like people who are out there trying to help others. And that role is so tiring. It's so challenging, because when you're in that role, and when you have that awareness of all this oppression, like it's so much extra work to put forth in order to support someone else's journey. So that makes me passionate also about supporting these individuals, of whom I know many, and of whom I love being around, because I feel, so much alliance in that, in that path, and in that endeavor.
Absolutely. What sense you now, Sonali? Is there something you'd like to express that hasn't yet been expressed? It's I feel like very full, like I ate a delicious meal for our conversation, but I almost, I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to give anything away about what's coming up, and I haven't heard them all either. So I'm very excited personally to hear all of the people we care about. Have you hold space for them, but also for them to hear your own reflections, what comes up for you with what they elicit. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm just excited. I'm just excited, and I feel impatience in my body personally, because I want to hear it. So I'm hoping that everyone listening will jump immediately to episode 2. And all right.
Oh, thank you, Tony. I'm excited too. I have a little bit of work to do before releasing things, but hopefully soon. And yeah, I think that it's something unique. that we captured. And even if it's just like the people in our world that that watch it, I'm really excited about that, and I'm grateful to you, because I think otherwise, I don't know. I like that you were, I'm so grateful that you were willing to do this with me and to do this intro. After we had recorded your the episode with you.
Thank you for listening and being a part of the Burn the Box movement.